person. We've got all of those recorded. If you want to view any of the past events, you can email me at staff@azwater.org, and please also email me just with any questions about AZ Water in general. As Kirsten mentioned a few minutes ago, we are coming up on our annual conference. It is April 6th through the 8th. You can register by going to azwater.org, and there's a banner that you can follow to get all of the conference information for attendees, sponsors, and exhibitors. There's over 80 hours of content that will be available on demand, as well as several live events, including awards and some virtual social events that are really fun. So we hope that you can check it out. Do make sure that you are an AZ Water member and that your membership is current, or you can renew at that time, but your renewal or your membership grants you a $100 discount. So it pays for itself right there, along with discounts on all of our other events throughout the year and other membership benefits. So with that in mind, I'm going to pass things over to Kirsten.
Great. Well, thank you, Shana, for telling us a little bit about that. Yeah, so my name is Kirsten Wansvik. I am the committee chair for the lunch committee down in Tucson, and I'm working with Brenda and Scott, who are the Phoenix Luncheon Committee, and we brought together this series of 6. This is the 5th of our luncheons. So welcome, and thank you for joining us virtually. So a few announcements along the way. Our next virtual luncheon will be March 25th. It will be an update on the CAP, and the presenter for that is still to be determined, but HDR will be the sponsor for that particular luncheon. PDH certificates, just like with the larger conference, PDH certificates are available for these luncheons. Shana maintains that and sends those out. So if you have any problems getting one from a virtual luncheon that you have attended, just go ahead and email Shana at staff@azwater.org, and she'll make sure you get your PDH certificate. And other points of interest, this is our lineup for the luncheon series. And as I mentioned, the next one is that March 25th virtual luncheon. So now I'd like to turn to our sponsor spotlight. Today's presentation, as well as sponsorship, is from Brown and Caldwell. So I'll tell you a little bit about them. So for more than 60 years, Brown and Caldwell has been creating leading-edge environmental solutions for public agencies and private industry. Brown and Caldwell is passionate about delivering exceptional service, collaborating with clients, adding value through innovation, and building relationships that last. Brown and Caldwell has over 45 offices across the U.S. and employs approximately 1,500 environmental professionals. So thank you, Brown and Caldwell, for both the presentation and the sponsorship today. And today's presentation is Controlling Fugitive Odor Emissions Gives Pima County a Breath of Fresh Air. It is presented by Katie Vanyo of Brown and Caldwell and Steve Davidson of Brown and Caldwell. And I know that we have Adam Levin on the line as at least one attendee who is from Pima County Wastewater. So welcome, Adam. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about this project. So Katie is an engineer with Brown and Caldwell. As a member of the wWater group in the Phoenix office, she has worked on a variety of water and wastewater projects throughout her career. An Arizona native, Katie recognized the importance of water resources in the desert Southwest, and in her time at Brown and Caldwell has developed a strong passion for water reuse projects. Now let me introduce Steve, who has over 40 years of experience designing, operating, and constructing environmental control systems for industrial and municipal facilities. He serves as one of Brown and Caldwell's senior odor control experts and has been involved in over 100 odor control and air emissions projects in various capacities. He has detailed and extensive experience in air emission control, sulfide and odor control chemistry, wastewater treatment, HVAC, and energy conservation and air handling systems. Mr. Davidson is a contributing author to the WRF research project, Minimization of Odors and Corrosion in Collection Systems, and has served on the WEF Volatile Organic Compound Task Force. So thank you. Welcome, Katie and Steve. We look forward to hearing about this project you did for Pima County Wastewater. So now I think Katie will take over sharing her screen.
I will. And Thank you.
Sure.
I want to check. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes. Looks
Perfect.
good.
Thank you. Well, hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Katie Vanyo with Brown and Caldwell. I'm here to talk about the project we did for Pima County a few years ago now. On the line too is Steve Davidson, who is really kind of the mastermind behind a lot of the recommendations that went into this project. But you know, I also have a slide to kind of get to. There was a pretty big team involved that made this happen, that made it so successful. So if any of them, I know Adam's on the line, want to chime in, they are more than welcome to. So back in 2017, Pima County WRD requested that Brown and Caldwell perform an evaluation of the existing headworks, odor control, and ventilation system at the Tres Rios work, which is located off of I-10 and the Ina Road exit just north of Tucson. The headworks, as you can see, I've highlighted in yellow, is located adjacent to a sports complex and dirt track. So numerous odor complaints were received from the nearby facility, and occasional attention was garnered from local media outlets. And these were motivators for the study, but really the primary reason for the evaluation was to improve the H2S levels in the workspaces. Levels as high as 10 parts per million were measured in the fine screen room, causing concerns for personnel safety and requiring special entry and monitoring. So the goals for this project were to, 1, reduce fugitive emissions, 2, provide safe working conditions for Pima County staff. The scope of this project actually did migrate a little bit. Originally, it was an evaluation with some recommendations kind of for a phased odor approach, but we ended up kind of reconfiguring that scope so that we could not only evaluate existing conditions, but develop recommendations that Pima County could implement almost immediately to see improvement at the headworks area. So we developed recommendations to do that, and actually those were constructed by KE&G Construction, and then we evaluated the final conditions to kind of get a baseline for where we were at. The preliminary evaluation included collecting air phase parameters, H2S concentrations, both by spot measurements with a Jerome analyzer and Odor continuous monitors. We looked at pressure conditions within channels, buildings, and other spaces using a low range manometer. We looked at duct static pressures to determine the available air draw potential through each major foul air duct. And we looked at liquid phase parameters such as dissolved sulfides, ORP, dissolved oxygen, and other related odor parameters. Airflow measurements where updated data were needed. We took air samples for reduced sulfur species. And then we conducted smoke testing, which actually proved to be one of the more validating exercises that we did in this entire evaluation. And I'll show you some pictures about that in a couple slides. So to give you a little rundown and familiar yourself with the headworks area, the headworks facility includes a Influent junction box, which accepts flows from the 72-inch plant interceptor, an 18-inch force main, and a 42-inch interceptor. Foul air from this junction box is actually treated in the Influent biotrickly filter located just east of the Influent structure. Flows then head north into the Coarse-Screening facility. The Coarse-Screening facility includes 3 coarse screens located within a building. Screened influent then goes into the screw pump inlet channel, and flow is conveyed up via Archimedes screw pumps up to the fine screens. The fine screens are also located within a building, the fine screen building, and then continues on to the grit basin where it undergoes aerated grit removal and then out through a partial flume. Screenings from the coarse screening room are conveyed to a hopper just west of the Coarse-Screening room and the truck loadout bay, as you can kind of see the ramp that comes up to collect screenings, and then the fine screenings as well as grit that's washed and compacted is conveyed to a hopper that is located above the fine screen loadout bay. So all of these locations were kind of what we were investigating in this evaluation. All of the foul air collected from everything past the influent junction structure is treated through their carbon vessels. So foul air from the influent structure is drawn and treated through the biotrickling filter. The wastewater in the structure is not exposed to ambient air, and there were no noticeable areas in this odors in this area, sorry. Fan draft from these structures was adequate to limit fugitive emissions, as shown by the pressure and airflow data that we collected from the atmospheric vents at the junction structure. So those are these little guys. As you can see some negative pressures at these locations. Data collected in this location showed the system is working as intended. The relief vent air velocity suggests very little pressure is developed at the junction box, and that much of the biotrickling filter capacity is handling the interceptor air appropriately. Next, we make our way into the Coarse-Screen room. The Coarse-Screen area is ventilated with a 3100 CFM supply from a makeup air handling unit, which you can't see in this photo, but the supply air is located just above where my mouse is, if you can see my mouse, upstream of the Coarse-Screen. And we also found that there was a single foul air duct to draw room air from just above floor level. Some of our observations were there were no foul air takeoffs on the screen inlet channels. Channel pressure data was 0, but odor logs indicated that there was some H2S migration into the room. The fine screen area and screw pumps include the screw pump inlet and outlet channels, fine screen influent channels, and fine screen building. Pressure and H2S data collected at the screw pump outlet channel is shown here in my blue boxes. So as you can see, kind of if you head up to maybe these middle two outlet channels, you see a slightly positive pressure, but actually down at the bottom of the picture here, you can see that there's a foul air duct that is intended to draw foul air from this channel. The available static pressure in that duct was negative 1.5 inches of water column. So what that was telling us was that there was available suction pressure, but there wasn't, it's basically like sucking through a straw with a bunch of holes in it. There wasn't enough suction to get all of that foul air out. So instead, due to the pressurization tendency of the screw pumps, you were seeing migration coming out of those channels. I've shown that a little better in this photo here. You can see the turbulent nature of the screw pumps that cause a slight increase in pressure on the discharge end of the screw pump. But also what was interesting is as you look at the dissolved sulfide versus H2S levels before and after the screw pumps, you can see that the dissolved sulfide levels were relatively high coming in. And after the screw pump, you see a significant drop in dissolved sulfide, but an increase in H2S, which tells us that this turbulent nature of the screws was causing H2S off-gassing from stripping the sulfide from the wastewater. And so you are seeing a lot of foul air migration at the relief vents, but also as you got to the fine screen room. The fine screen building is a single large structure with screens and a supply air ventilation located at the east end of the building. So the supply air is actually located right along the south wall of the fine screens. And that was intended to provide supply air to the entire fine screen room. So one of the observations we were seeing was that this entire west end of the fine screening facility was not receiving fresh airflow. So actually the air was pretty stagnant. It was a little wet, and we had been told that there was occasion that operators would open the window on that west end of the building to get some fresh air in over by the grit washer, which you can see down in the bottom of this layout here, and the screening hoppers. A belt conveyor moves screenings from these fine screens over to the screening hopper, which are then discharged down into the truck loadout bay. We also found that foul air draft was insufficient to maintain negative pressures and channels throughout the fine screening room. Fugitive emissions through equipment and cover leaks was evident from elevated H2S concentrations in the room. But also, when I get to the photos of the smoke testing, you'll see this even more apparent. And then I guess just to add to the supply air system, we noticed that it failed to supply all building spaces with fresh air and ensure good air mixing to provide a more comfortable and safe environment. So that was there was quite a few takeaways from this room itself. We then went up to the roof, and you can see where the foul air ducts all connect. You can see my colleague Steve here measuring the duct static pressure. So this skinny duct where he's taking the measurement from, that was actually the channel header. So it was pulling foul air from the fine screen influent channels, and then it was connecting to this larger, this is the fine screen room foul air duct. And what we saw was you had only -1 inches of static water static pressure in this small channel header, but just downstream of this damper here, you can actually see that the available static pressure in that line was much, much greater. So one of our immediate improvement recommendations was to open that damper and allow more air to draw. But I will add that, kind of one of the downsides to doing that is this foul air duct is so large that you're increasing what's coming from the room itself. But really, we noticed that we needed to draw significant more airflow from the channels themselves. So I'll get into what we recommended there. So as I mentioned, smoke testing was one of the more validating experiences. And this really, kudos goes to Dean Mullis, who pushed that we include this as part of the scope of work and data evaluation, because it was extremely telling. So we performed smoke testing at the influent junction structure just upstream of the coarse screens, the screw pump inlet and outlet, and in the fine screen influent channels. We did this by lowering a smoke bomb into the channel, into a bucket, into the channel, allowing smoke to disperse and follow that foul air flow. So you can see, so the photo on the left shows when we had dropped it just upstream of the coarse screen. And what we saw immediately was smoke migration out of the channel covers and all of the equipment. And then if you look at when we dropped the smoke bomb into the screw pump inlet and outlet channels, you could see smoke pouring out of the fine screen equipment. And then when we dropped the smoke bomb into the fine screen influent channel, you can see this notorious photo of smoke just pouring out of the cracks in the cover, in the covers. Now, these were not leak tight covers. There was probably, I don't know, maybe 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch gap between the cover plates. So you could see smoke was just finding any space it could to just pour out and migrate all over. So our recommended improvements included changes to airflow, to the airflow. We redirected some ductwork. We rebuilt a ductwork section. We also recommended improving cover tightness. I mentioned that analogy of sucking through a straw. If you increase that tightness, then when you suck, there's something kind of there to fight against it and allow it to draw. And then we also recommended a new supply air handling unit to supply air to the west end of the fine screen room, which is where I mentioned those, the fine screen hopper and the grit washing station is located. I realize what's on the screen is a lot, but it's mostly to show you the extent of the foul air duct modifications and supply air modifications we recommended to the system. I want to point out that although it looks like we added a lot of ductwork, we did not add a significant amount of airflow to the carbon system. What we intended to do was actually redirect some of the flows, and I can kind of walk you through that. So we added channel ducts in the coarse screen channels as well as at the coarse screening equipment, and we reduced the amount of foul air we drew from the coarse screen room. There was a single foul air duct in the screw pump Influent, and we divided that flow in half, and we added a channel drop on the west or on the east end of this channel. We added a new supplier header, but we didn't change any of the airflows coming from the supplier handling unit in the fine screen room, but we did add a supplier handling unit to disperse fresh air to the west end of the fine screen room. We added we modified the channel flow from the fine screen Influent channel, and then we added a duct to take flow from the fine screening equipment itself. We added a damper for the fine screen hopper area duct. And then we added channel drops into the grit Influent basin, and we reduced the overall draw from the flow meter vault to accommodate that additional airflow from the grit Influent channels. We also included foul air duct drops down into the fine screen truck loadout bay. With all of these changes, we added about 2,800 CFM to the system, which is how much we added for the new supplier system. So the rest of these slides for a little bit are going to kind of show you what some of the improvements looked like. We added a new sealed cover system throughout the headworks. The seals provided at the gate valves and equipment to reduce odor leakage. So prior to installing these covers, these slide gates used to have a box around them, and this area where my mouse is was actually all open. So that was a significant, finding to see that as we got some positive channel pressures, the foul air was migrating out of those open spaces and some of those non-tight areas. So we tightened all that up with this leak-proof system and tightened up all of the gate operators as well. And then you can see the photo on the right. This is the Influent channel to the coarse screening room and all the new covers located there. We added new channel drops down to the coarse screen Influent, and we added these flexible hoses to allow access into the channels. And we also included, as part of the drop down to the channel, we also added a drop to the coarse screen equipment with a flexible hose so that you can still access equipment as needed. As I had mentioned, this is the screw pump Influent channel. We redirected some of the flow that was being drawn from the west end of the Influent channel, and we added a channel drop over to the east end. And so you can see some photos. I should note, as we're going through this, all of the existing ductwork is shown in orange. Anything shown in white is the new ductwork that was added. You can see the new channel drops down to the fine screen Influent channels. Reminder, there were channel drops down to the fine screen Influent channels, but we made this header larger so we could collect more airflow from those locations. We also located or included takeoffs onto the fine screen equipment itself, both with flexible hoses, so you could still access equipments and channels as needed. Not part of our study or recommendations, but kind of going on concurrently with what we were doing, was a new enclosed fine screen conveyor was installed, I think pretty close to around the time that these improvements were done. So Pima County was already planning on this taking place, and it just so happened that it worked out really nicely with everything else we were doing. And then you can see we built, it's really hard to see, but you can see this duct, which is the new channel header from the fine screen influent channel and screens, with a new penetration up through the roof so that it could branch into the main duct on the roof without being limited by any suction draw. The new supply air handling unit was located on the west side of the fine screen truck loadout bay ramp. And that supply air duct went up and into the building on the north end. And it was a really tight squeeze, but we were able to fit it in right there on the west wall, just above the window, to provide some fresh air to that side of the building. And finally, we show the grit influent channels. We have a brand new header to collect flow from the grit influent channels. Those also included flexible hoses for channel access. And you can see the new cover system and sealing up the leakage around the gates here as well. General takeaway. So I think, it's important to point out that if you look at the plant influent channel data, you see a general increase in H2S. But when you look at the room airflow itself, you can see that we had a significant improvement in the room itself. So what that told us was we're keeping the odors down in the channels, and we are keeping them out of the working spaces. Another point to make is the loading to the carbon system did increase, and that's something that needs to be evaluated. Is the life of the carbon. So I believe, and I don't know if Pima County wants to add on to this or if there will be another presentation coming out about that soon, but that's where this study left off. Is the next phase of work is really to determine what's next in terms of treatment here.
Yeah, Katie, I can pitch in there just for a second. We are looking at replacing the GAC units with biological filters. And that's under design, and we're actually on the streets right now for a CMAR to work with our designer and to be able to go into construction on that. Super.
Thanks, Adam. I thought you might have something to say about that.
You're welcome.
So, and their wWater Luncheon Committee, there's, your next, something for your next lineup of presentations. So we can see that another positive takeaway was in our improvements evaluation findings, we found all negative pressures in our channels, which is what we wanted. Instead of seeing, foul air migrating out of the channels, we saw that it was all being drawn into the foul air system. And then this is where it gets the most fun, is the pre and post smoke testing photos. And I'm not making this up. I know it looks fake, but on the left, you can see that this is the smoke testing effort we did in 2017 before any improvements made. And you can see that the coarse screen room was pretty cloudy and smoky. On the right, after we dropped the smoke bomb in the same location post improvements, there was absolutely no visible smoke in the room. Similarly with the fine screen room, I could have shown many pictures for the fine screen smoke testing, but we had smoke, and actually you can see the open conveyor that was in there prior to the enclosed conveyor coming in after, during this project. But with that enclosed conveyor, you see absolutely no smoke migration, but even on the front side of these screens in the initial smoke testing effort, you could see smoke pouring out of those equipment enclosures, but in the second round of smoke testing, you saw none. And this is a photo looking down the grip basin influent that I had shown earlier in this presentation with the new covers and the channel drops. You see no smoke at all. But this is probably my favorite video, which I'll turn it down just because I think it's loud. But you can see that the smoke is actually being drawn back down into the channel, which means our foul air collection system is adequately working. So I can play that one more time in case you just want to see it, because that's my favorite part of this whole presentation personally. And then this is the grip basins when we dropped the smoke bomb into the fine screen influent channel. This entire grip basin area had some smoke pouring out kind of right in the upstream side of it. But now you can see there was no smoke migration at all. So our key findings were that room air quality improved dramatically. You could see the H2S decreased from greater than 10 parts per million to less than 0.005 parts per million, which I think satisfies the goal of improving, providing safe working conditions. We captured fugitive emissions to greater than 99%. We noticed the difference with the fresh air ventilation with the new diffusers and the new air handling unit. And then as Adam just chimed in and I had mentioned, I know that they were monitoring the performance of the carbon life, and that led to the ultimate decision to change the treatment entirely. So the conclusions from this presentation is that, flowing wastewater induces air currents and air pressures. So if you don't control it, if you don't find a way to draw it out, you might get fugitive emissions, and that can become really important when you're located next to a recreational facility, for instance. Duct systems must extend to all sources, but you might want to consider multiple takeoffs. As we saw, there was some locations where we had a takeoff, but there was just one, and we added something maybe to the other side of the channel that helped draw all of that foul air. Watch for leaky equipment. The covers themselves were inherently leaky. There was gaps between them. So covers, gates, and equipment are all inherently leaking. So look to tighten those up where you can. To again, really, it improves your suction draw from the foul air system. And cover tightness enables good air suction from the main odor control system. Tight covers with gaskets, which is what we had recommended, are essential. So for the project team acknowledgements, as I mentioned, we had a pretty big team, a lot of key players. Dean Mullis with Pima County was the PM for this project. He was the man behind the let's do smoke testing, and I think every person from the consulting team to staff level was so grateful that he pushed that. Bobby D'Angelo and Dennis Frulich were also heavily involved in all of our workshops, communicating with staff and coordinating. Steve Davidson with Brown and Caldwell, who's on the line now, who I mentioned is kind of the mastermind behind a lot of the recommendations. And special shout out to LambTech Services, that not only did they provide data collection support, but they supported a lot of the evaluation efforts and testing. Alex Mayer and Ed Lamb have been working down at the plant for a long time, so they provided additional historic expertise. And then KE&G Construction were the JOC that was on board to build all of these improvements so that we could get in there and evaluate the conditions. So that is all I had for you. I hope that covers most of it, but if there's any questions, I can take them at this time.
Yeah, Katie, Steve here. I thought maybe I'd add a comment to this to embellish what you've presented, which was very good in my opinion there. One of the things that we saw there that isn't really discussed, it's kind of hard to define, is the relationship and balance in these buildings, airflow balance in the buildings that creates balancing issues. And in this case, some of these rooms were overly pressurized and there wasn't real good comparable flows from the exhaust system compared to the supply system. So when you couple that with the fact that channels are leaking out, then pressurizing the room actually squeezes a lot of odor right out the doors. And that was probably what was causing a good deal of the problems over at the recreational fields. So once you get control of those fumes in the channel, then the balances, if you should have imbalances, if you should have any, supply to exhaust are much, much less of a factor. But we did look at that. And of course, you saw that we did put in a new air handling unit. And the other two air handling units that were there did get refurbished on the ductwork side so that we made sure that everything throughout the facility on the supply side was working correctly. Back to you, Katie.
Thanks, Steve. That was a really good point. See, I told you he was the mastermind.
Katie, from a owner's perspective, you know, we were kind of struggling with two different things. One, we had odors at the nearby properties that were a complaint from the community, but we also had areas in the headworks that either were unpleasant or unsafe for our operators. And so our operators often would have to carry an H2S monitor when they go into a workspace. And knowing that, you know, the H2S levels were high, often they would leave doors open while they were working in there, which would make the complaints next door even worse. So getting the odors and the H2S levels under control was really key to the whole success. And we really appreciated that Brown and Caldwell didn't just give us a nice report, but they actually gave us actionable items. And teaming with our JOC contractors, it was a really good team just to actually do the improvements, not just talk about them or plan them for future. So it really was a very collaborative effort between the consultant and our contractors on the project. So shout out to Brown and Caldwell and Katie and everyone that was working on it. So
thanks, Adam. You know, that's a good point. That's one of the things I appreciate the most about this project was that we saw something tangible in the end. Totally forgot to mention Tom Chapman was a huge part of this all coming together. So he's in California right now. Well, he's in California now permanently, but yeah, he was an integral part to this. Any other thoughts?
Well, thank you, Katie, very much, and Steve for a great presentation. It's awesome and very satisfying to see the reduction in all of the smoke, and it's kind of cool when you get to see the results of a project so obviously. So Shanna, do you have any final thoughts, or we can wrap it up?
Nope, I was just watching the chat for any questions. I don't see any. I have, this has been recorded, so if you need to review something or want to share it, you can let me know, or you can check our committee page for that file. And I'm sure, and I can forward any questions to Katie if you think of something after the fact. But thank you very much to our presenters and sponsor and everyone for joining us today. And I hope everyone has a great day and then great weekend.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thank you.
Bye.